Well, good morning. Today, looking at the equations in standard form. Standard form looks like this, where we have some number times x plus some number times the y coordinate equal to a constant term, simply a number. So that standard form is a way to write the linear equation. And we've worked with that. We've learned cover up and divide method of graphing those things, covering up and dividing, getting those x and y intercept points and being able to graph those linear functions. We've worked on that before. So you've seen it, but today we just haven't called it the standard form yet. The first thing I want to show you is how do we write equivalent equations that are in standard form. Listen, in an algebra, you can multiply or divide anything by anything, as long as you do it to everything. So if I take this equation and I were to multiply everything by the same value, multiply this by 2, multiply this by 2, multiply the 4 by 2, those are equivalent equations. It still does not change the equality of the equation if I do the same thing, multiplying or dividing, to everything in the equation. So I multiplied everything by the same number, 2. Those are equivalent equations. If you were to graph both of those equations on a grid, on a graph, they would go right on top of each other. They are the exact same equation. So again, I can do that again. I multiply this by 4 or 3. Multiplying every term here by 3, and I've got equivalent equations. That's one way of writing two equivalent equations. Could you do that? You could also divide. You could divide this by the same number. Dividing everything by 2, for example, and you still have an equivalent equation. That's standard form. That's how you write standard form equations in equivalent form. The second thing I want to show you today about standard form equations is how to write those if we're given a certain bit of information. Like if I'm told that a line goes through a couple of points, either by graph, they give you the picture, or they tell you just these coordinates. If you know the equation goes through these 2 points right here, then you can write the equation in standard form this way. There are 3 steps. You first want to calculate the slope.
When looking for a home,
so we know how to calculate slope. Well, if we have a couple of points, we take
House Hunters,
find the rise.
House Hunters, all new episode tonight at 10/9 Central, only on HGTV.
By taking the y coordinates and subtracting in the same direction, I'm going to subtract the y's, or the runs, the x's. And so the slope is -3. That's step number 1. Step number 2 is go ahead and write it in what we learned last week. We learned the point slope form. So we're going to take that slope and we're going to write it in this form, which is the form that we learned last week, not the standard form. That's what we're learning today. We're going to learn how to take this point slope form that we learned last week and rewrite it in standard form. So I know the slope, I just figured that out. I also know a point that it goes through. I can choose either one of these points, and this is y. I'm going to subtract y just like last week from y. I'm going to subtract that one coordinate, that y coordinate. Then I'm going to write in the slope in for m, and then I'm going to subtract away that x coordinate of that same point. So all I did was write in for y1, I wrote the y coordinate, and for x1, I wrote the x coordinate in that equation. Now I just clean up. I'm going to get rid of parentheses, and I'm going to collect like terms, and that's step 3, rewriting it in the form that we've learned today. Getting all the x and y things on the left side of the equation, leaving the number, the constant term on the right. That rewrites it in standard form after we get rid of parentheses by distributing the -3 through. And now this is the x thing, but it's on the right side of the equal sign. I'm going to move it on the left. When I cross that equator, it becomes positive. This -1's on the left. I want to write it on the right, so I move it over there and it becomes positive when I cross it on that side, writing it above its like term. That gives me 4. So I've got the y and the x on the right side, and probably we usually like to write the y thing or the x thing first. Not that it really matters, but that's usually the way I like to write it. So there's your A times X, B times Y equal a constant term. That's your standard form. 3 steps. Those things. Go to work. We are the Ask Academy.